So the Detroit Jewish Book Fair happens here, and this is the first day, and they're about to do literature starting in a couple minutes. Oh yeah, you know it. Yes, it's Sarah Goodman. Sarah Goodman and Confino, and she's up to no good. We're on that plan where I know I'm trying to read backwards. I'll come upstairs. And I'll help you. It's all good. Okay, I think people are still trickling in. I also like how I wing it because if I write a speech, I get nervous. I am. Fall color. I don't like the dark blue, and they shipped one last night, of course. So on a Halloween costume, and just snag right away. My son's Peter Pan costume. And originally I was supposed to be Wendy, my husband was Captain Hook, but then my 3-year-old decided that he wanted to be an elephant and I had to give mom the elephant. So I was in a onesie. At least I was warm. Okay, but I went from wearing like the sexy costume to the largest land mammal. I ran into all these moms who were dressed all cute, and I was just like, hi. Hiya. Hi. Thank you. I'm tired today, so I appreciate that. Good makeup. I'm such an insomniac, and I get nervous with like travel, and then with my 3-year-old in the bed kicking me and like hitting because it's wide awake from candy, it's just like snacks is fun. Sweet, but yeah. I want them to close the door. Jerry, can you please close the door? Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And welcome to the Jay's 72nd Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. God, 72 years. My name is Sandy Matz, and I'm a member of the Book Fair Executive Committee. Book Fair is proudly sponsored by the Jay, where you can find your Jewish center. Book Fair would like to thank our bronze book sponsor, the Henry and Delia Myers Library, Joan and Dr. Robert Jampel, and supporter, the Sisterhood of Congregation Beth Shalom, for their support. Thanks to all our generous donors, we are able to present most of our programs free of charge, and we invite you to become a patron or sponsor as well. Lots of perks. I also want to extend our gratitude to the entire Book Fair committee. Your dedication and efforts have made all of this possible. We have a dynamic lineup of fantastic authors and programs that you will not want to miss. Please pick up a Book Fair brochure or visit our website at jccdet.org/bookfair for more information. Please also visit our bookstore after the program. You'll see how beautifully it's set up. Your purchases help to support this annual event and allow us to bring these wonderful authors to our community. Additionally, please shop our online bookstore where you will find more hand-selected books. Just visit bookshop.org/shop/Jewish Book Fair. It is now my pleasure to introduce our special guest. Sarah Goodman Confino is the best-selling author of She's Up to No Good and For the Love of Friends. She teaches high school English and journalism in Montgomery County, Maryland, where she lives with her husband, 2 sons, and 2 miniature schnauzers, Sandy and Gracie. I'm so glad there's a dog named after me. When Sarah's not writing or working out, she can be found on the beach or at a Bruce Springsteen show, sometimes even dancing on stage. For more information, visit www.saraconfino.com. Following the program, Miss Goodman Confino will be signing copies of She's Up to No Good just outside the gallery. At this time, please silence your cell phones and turn off any devices that light up or go bump in the night. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Goodman Confino.
See if I can snag this and walk around a little bit. So thank you so much for having me. I heard this is the oldest Jewish book fair in the country, which is kind of crazy. I'm sorry, I'm too much of a teacher to stand at a podium. I need to be walking around a little bit more. I also get nervous if I'm just standing there with my hands. If I'm holding the mic and walking around, I don't get so nervous. So let's start off with how I got here. I obviously was booked through the Jewish Book Council. By the way, I'm going to, if I lose my train of thought, we're going to blame my husband on that because he took my 3-year-old home from trick-or-treating early, and I got there and found he had eaten about 20 pieces of candy. And I had a 6 a.m. flight, and then my husband was like, oh, I have work to do, bye. And I'm like, thanks. Appreciate that one. So if I lose my train of thought, we're just going to blame him. Anyways, I did the Jewish Book Council talking about my book, She's Up to No Good. It was my first time doing it. And when you're doing the Jewish Book Council, there's a lot of presentations. So you sit there while, I think it was about 100 people in my session, talk about their books. And I was a little surprised listening to all these books because about 95% of them were about the Holocaust, which is important. especially with what's going on right now. But isn't there more to the Jewish story than us getting killed? Like, I mean, there's all these books about this right now, and we're seeing this going on. And I do want to address that briefly. My first ever piece of published writing was actually about Israel. When I was 14, we had to write an essay using sensory details for my 9th grade English class, which is funny because then I taught 9th grade English for 16 years. And I wrote about Jerusalem. We had gone the year before. And I wrote about walking through the old city and what you see, smell, taste, touch, all of that. And the Jewish Federation, I think it was the national organization actually, published it in their newsletter about trips to Israel. So high school in Israel, birthright, all of that. And that was my first time getting anything published. So what's going on right now really is very personal to me. And I know everybody has some connection to it in one way or another. With that said, I want to try and see if we can get a few laughs today. Let's not get too morbid with this. I think we could all use a little comic relief. That's usually what I get brought in for. So let's see if we can have some fun today with this. So I'm listening to these presentations about the Holocaust. And is anybody familiar with Jean Meltzer? She's another Jewish author. So funny story, she and I met because I stalked her a little bit. I wanted a blurb for one of my books, and I befriended her on social media. I found out she lived near me, and we had some mutual friends. And we started talking, and she wrote a blurb for my 3rd book, Don't Forget to Write, which came out September 1st. And then it turned out we were related by marriage, because isn't that exactly how the Jewish story goes? We all know somebody who knows somebody. My mother was like, ask her if she's related to our Meltzers. And I was like, Ma, there's a lot of Meltzers out there. She's not going to be related to them. Turned out she was. So she and I started talking about this. And because she had the same experience I did, where she's writing about happy little funny stories, and we're listening to everybody else talk about everybody dying. And so one of the things that we've had a conversation about is the need for stories about Jewish joy. Because really, isn't that a huge amount of what our experience is? Think about any of the holidays. I mean, yes, there's the joke about how all of our holidays are, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. But how many of you have really happy memories of holidays with family? And it's not all, bickering around the table, it's just the fun parts of it. So I'm here because I think Jewish joy is important. I don't think that we just want to focus on the stories of sadness and survival and fighting. I think sometimes we need to show that there is more to us than just that. And at first I thought it was the weirdest compliment I had gotten. In fact, I wasn't sure it was a compliment at first or not. I was doing a book club, and somebody said to me, what I love about your books is you write about Jewish characters, and their entire personality isn't just Jewish. And I was like, was that a compliment or an insult? I didn't know what that meant. And then I read some more books, and I was like, oh, anybody seen the Barbie movie? I read a few books where I think the main character's job was just Jew, like Ken being Beach, like it. And, I think that there is a lot more. I think that there are certainly people who that's the main focus of their identity. But I think the overwhelming majority of us are people, right? Our Jewish identity is part of us, but it's a part of the whole, not the entire whole. And so I really had fun kind of exploring that in my work. And I didn't really know that I was doing that until somebody pointed that out. And then I really looked at my own work through that lens. And my first book, for example, For the Love of Friends, it is about a 32-year-old girl who is in 5 weddings in the same summer. I have a little experience with some of that. My best friend's ringtone was the Darth Vader theme music for a full year during her wedding. She knows that. We're cool now. She lives on the street behind me. We're all good. But she did keep texting me while she was listening to the audiobook. She had read it before and being like, oh, God, I did that to you, didn't I? She kind of did. For example, I wasn't allowed to put highlights in my hair. She wanted to be the blonde one. She is blonde. There's nothing I could do to be blonder than her. But okay. My character in that was half Jewish. And I did that very deliberately because I wasn't sure that the country was going to actually like a book about a Jewish girl. And it felt like a cop-out at the time. And you know what? It was. And I recognized that when I sat down to write She's Up to No Good. Now, She's Up to No Good was kind of born about 15 years ago, believe it or not. My grandmother, we were sitting at my aunt and uncle's house. It was Rosh Hashanah dinner. And I even know what year it was because I had my puppy at the time. She's gone now, but she was there with us. And we're sitting around the table, and my grandmother tells a story that I had never heard before. Has anyone read my book, She's Up to No Good, yet? I know Diana has. We've got a few hands. All right, some of this is going to sound familiar. I'm going to try not to spoil anything for people who haven't read it. But my grandmother is sitting at the table, And she tells us that her sister, who died when she was in her 40s of breast cancer, who wanted to be a writer, actually, I actually have her typewriter, she fell in love with somebody when she was in college. And she decided she was going to marry him. And she went home for the summer and she got a telegram saying, "Meet me in New York City." That's all it said. And she decided to go. She figured, this is it. This is the proposal. This is coming. It's happening. And her mother said, absolutely not. If he wants to propose, he's going to come to the house and do it properly. And my grandmother helped her sneak out of the house and got her to the train station where their brother was waiting for her. He dragged her off the train kicking and screaming. A week later, that guy married another girl. And she never found out what happened. And she died, 30 years later, not knowing. And her marriage was pretty not great. Her husband, while she was dying of cancer, her husband was cheating on her with the wife of the guy in the room next door. Wasn't so good. And I knew some of the story, but my grandmother then tells me the rest of the story, which is that 10 years earlier, she went up to her hometown in Massachusetts and met up with this guy who had broken her sister's heart. She went to lunch with him. I'm like, you went to lunch with him? And she's like, I had to know. And she said, I don't know what just beeped at me. She said she sat down with him. And she said, I got to know, why did you invite my sister to meet you in New York that weekend? And he says, oh, I wanted her to meet the woman I was going to marry. My grandmother gave me some of the best life advice I've ever heard, which is you get so few opportunities in your life to throw a drink in someone's face. Take them. That story absolutely floored me. I could not get that out of my head. Literally, 15 years later, I'm still thinking about that story. And I think the reason I'm thinking about that so much is because we tend to look at people in our lives, especially people who were there before we were, as having always just kind of been the way that they are. And there's so much more to the story. And I really liked the idea of digging into that. Now, not to be outdone, my other grandmother who was there, she's gone now. That grandmother is 96, still kicking and crazy, but she was crazy when I was a baby, so that's not new. She's a nut, but she's fun. Except when she gives my kids, sharp objects. I don't understand this. My 3-year-old loves elephants, and so she pulled out a thing of, cocktail spears that had, elephants on the end, and she's like, Maxie, look! And I'm like, no, he's 3. No, we're not doing that. She's like, well, all my kids lived, and I was like, did they? Or did you have 12 and only 3 made it? But okay, my other grandmother, not to be outdone, decides to tell a story as well. And apparently when she met my grandfather, who died in 1960, so before my time, he was engaged to another woman. And he took one look at my grandmother, went home, dumped her, and then basically proposed to my grandmother within a week. And I'm sitting here like, you're 90. What? That was a thing? And I think that so many people really don't think about the lives that our older relatives lived before we came into the picture. And these ideas have just been floating around and floating around. And then I had a 2-book deal for my first 2 books. So the first one was already written, they bought that, and then I had to write another one on contract, which was a very new experience for me. I teach creative writing, and I like walking my kids through the process of the whole publishing process, because when I started, I knew nothing. So, for example, my editor sends me my, I think it was my cold read edits, and it's like, I need these back in 3 days, okay? And I had to Google what cold read edits were. I'd never heard of that. I was like, what does she want me to do with this? I had no author friends. I knew nothing. So I like walking my kids through the process of how this works. But when you have a contract for a book that is not written or conceived or anything, you basically write an outline. So I'm a teacher. I wrote a very teachery outline. It's got the bullet points and the A, B, C, D, the Roman numerals and all that. And my agent was like, oh, honey, no. That's not what this means. And I was like, oh, let me try again. Okay. So basically, they want you to outline all of the plot points of the entire book, leave no secrets, none of that. So I think it was probably 1 paragraph that was 6 pages, single-spaced long, which my dad likes to say is the mark of a psychopath, but okay. When you get 1 long block of text, the person's angry and you can't reason with them. So my agent had me break that up into some paragraphs, which was good advice. And I came up with this idea because my grandmother, who was 91 at the time, my uncle had rented a house in her hometown of Gloucester, Massachusetts, and wanted her to come up for the week. And she decided at 91 that she was going to drive herself there. 9 hours. She also did not have a license right then because she had had a stroke. And don't tell it. Anybody know Charlotte Chansky? Jewish geography. Somebody's got to know her. Don't tell her I told you guys this. My mom may have been the one to call the cops on her because driving after that stroke was not so good. She finally gave up her car last year, but she did threaten to buy another one. So there's that. My 6-year-old was like, if you buy one, can I drive it? And she was like, yeah. But basically, we wanted to get her on the train, and even at 91, that's a little too much, we thought, for just her. And I started thinking, where would I have to be in my life for me to just drop everything and take her? I've taken my grandmother on a few road trips before. Took her to Syracuse when I was 16. That was an interesting one. That was a long drive from D.C. She also was listening to my Discman because my music was apparently terrible. And we hit a bump, and she starts whacking it on the side of the door, which, if you have messed with a Discman, was not the way to fix that. And yeah. Anyways, I remember asking myself, where would I have to be? Obviously, having a 1-year or a new baby, that wasn't the time to go for a 9-hour car trip. But my main character, Jenna, was born out of that conversation because she is 34, and her husband leaves her at the beginning of the book. And she moves home for 6 months to kind of regroup, and her grandmother comes and announces the same kind of trip. Now, I did not use Gloucester, Massachusetts, because I was writing this thing in the early stages of the pandemic with a newborn again, and a research trip with a newborn in a pandemic was just not the move. We would not have gotten to research anything. And it was actually my dad who said, why don't you just make up a fake town then? It was a good idea. It worked well. So we start off for this book. Evelyn, the grandmother, shows up at Jenna's parents' house and announces she's driving herself home. And her parents say no. And Jenna says, okay, I'll do it. And she surprises herself with that because she's been pretty stuck in a rut for 6 months. So this journey then opens up into learning about her grandmother's first love. And she wasn't allowed to marry him because he wasn't Jewish. And I think that that's a situation that if we haven't been the ones threatening on that, we've probably been threatened that we had to marry Jewish. Anybody ever heard they had to marry Jewish? So my family was interesting with that. My dad was he is still a diehard Washington football fan. Don't judge. He grew up in D.C. It happens. He was a season ticket holder since '63. He's missed, I think, 10 home games since then. Diehard fan. His big condition, he sat me down one time for a serious talk on the white sofas that I'm still not allowed to sit on these sofas, by the way. My children can eat on them, but if I sit on them, it's because somebody died or I'm in really big trouble. So like when I banged up my car in high school, white sofa time. He sits me down on the white sofa and I'm like, oh no, what did I just get busted for? And he tells me, you can marry someone who's not Jewish, and I won't like it, but I'll understand. You can marry a Republican, he's a pretty hardcore Democrat, and I'll have nothing to say to him, but I'll understand. But if you marry a Cowboys fan, you're out of this family, we're sitting Shiva before you, dead to us, it's over. I think he meant it too. My family was not super strict about that. In fact, my sister-in-law is a Mexican Catholic, and my mother blinked about once at that and then has been great about it. But it wasn't always that way in my family. My aunt is not Jewish, and it took my uncle 10 years to propose, 10 years of dating. And it was finally my mother who said, Mike, if this is the girl for you, what's the big deal? My grandfather apparently didn't like it so much, but he came around eventually. And I think that most families are kind of getting a little bit more used to the idea of blending. But in 1950, when part of the timeline of this book is set, not as much. And so in this story, we find that Evelyn falls in love with a young Portuguese guy who is working as a fisherman in this town, which is very common in that area. And her parents will not let her marry him. And it's a fairly foreign concept, and I actually got a little bit of pushback from some readers who called that racism. And I would argue that's not actually racism. It's looking at this, the year that it happened, and Evelyn actually makes this comment in the book. If we're looking at 1950, there's a much bigger push to marry Jewish right after the Holocaust, isn't there? We got to repopulate a little bit. So I think that that was an interesting concept to explore, but I also think that look at your parents' marriages. Try to picture somebody being before that person that they married. It's hard to picture that. And I love this idea of throwing that on its head and being able to really talk about what happened before these relationships, before these lives that have changed. And it was a really fun topic to explore. It's another one that I actually went into in my third book, Don't Forget to Write, as well. I've got another older character with a history. And I'm having a lot of fun with that era as well. I think that this country really had a big shift after the Kennedy assassination. Like, you hear the 60s, for example, and you're picturing hippies and all this stuff, but most of the 60s weren't hippies and all that. That was closer to the end of the 60s. So even though I was not born yet, I really am having I'm enjoying exploring what life looked like back then. And it's been kind of a wild ride with this too, because some of these stories that come out, I'm hearing from readers how many very similar stories they had with immigrant parents and just sort of dealing with acclimating to America without giving up our culture. So this is a topic I think we probably all dealt with in our Jewish lives as well. So let me ask a question. How many of you grew up keeping kosher? I did. How many of you still do? A lot of the hands went down. I actually wanted to in our house. My husband was the one who said no. He grew up much more. I know Confino doesn't sound Jewish. He's Sephardic. My mother actually set us up. Yentas. It's what they do. She set up 6 couples who've gotten married. She's good at that. Supposedly that means she gets into the kingdom of heaven, which we don't really believe in heaven, so I'm not sure how that works. But she gets to take a guest because she got 6 people in. If you get 3 people in, that's. She tells me if, my dad's making her angry that day, it'll be me. So that's a good start. But, sorry, where was I going with the last name there? Okay, so the keeping kosher thing, my husband didn't want to do it. And I didn't like it growing up. Do you know I didn't have a real Oreo till I got to college? We had Hydrox in my house. And my parents weren't strict with it. If we wanted takeout, we ate it off paper plates, like they weren't crazy. But my mother explained that she wanted to keep kosher so that we would know what it was. Her parents didn't keep kosher anymore. My dad's mom never did. So by them doing it, we really got to experience that. And I liked the idea of my kids experiencing it too. Now, the good thing is my parents are still keeping kosher and they live 1.5 miles from me, so my kids are experiencing it even if it's not in our house. But we all need to make these decisions about what we're going to keep in our Jewish lives and what we're going to let go and move on to assimilating a little bit more to American culture and some of the stuff that doesn't make sense. And one of the things that I actually love most about Judaism, I've got 2 favorite things about Judaism. It's not the food. The food is good, but my favorite thing actually is that we don't push it on anybody. We're not trying to convert you. Because I think we've all also had that experience when somebody wanted to talk to us and we're like, mezuzah, go away. I've actually said that before. And they're like, what? And I'm like, oh God, okay, now I have to explain, okay. But my other favorite thing is that Judaism evolves. So we can now eat rice on Passover, right? The Sephardic rules, they adopted all of that. I think that's such a cool development because so much of what we do is rooted in what we've done for thousands of years. But I like that they were like, you know what, that one doesn't make sense anymore. Toss it out the window. Let's modernize. How weird was it the first time you actually ate something over Passover that you've been forbidden to your whole life, though? It's weird, right? Like my husband was like, let's get Mexican food. And I was like, we can't get Mexican food. What's wrong with you? And he was like, oh, wait, we can actually eat that. Okay, I looked at the ingredients. We're good. It was just so weird. But I've always liked exploring that idea. My mother always said with religion, you've got to decide how crazy you're going to make yourself. And it's true, right? So, for example, one of the things we did this year, we did not actually take the kids to synagogue this year. My 3-year-old is feral, and it just wasn't worth the money this year. Very sweet, but why do people complain about 2-year-olds? 2-year-olds are delightful. It's 3. 3 is the problem. 3-nagers. Oh, what's wrong with him? He'll grow out of it, right? You guys promise? I'm nervous about this one. Don't tell me that. He'll be not sleeping in my bed by then, right? If he's still in my bed at 14, we're going to have bigger problems. Oh, God. It's a lot. It's a lot. We decided not to do synagogue this year. We're going to do it next year. This year, we decided the kids weren't going to get a lot out of it, and we wanted to do something meaningful religion-wise. So we took a whole bag of bread, and we walked down to the creek, and we explained the whole throwing away your sins thing. The kids had a lot of fun throwing the bread. I'm not sure so many sins got thrown over, but we did talk about, my 6-year-old wasn't going to hit his brother as much. Like we did talk about some of the things he was throwing away. That lasted not even until we got home, but it's a start. And we wanted to do something meaningful with it. And I think the kids did get something out of that. Then they started telling us what to throw away. So like my husband had to throw his yell away. But they understood the concept. And it was an interesting way to show religion without making it be, because all right, when I say high holidays when you're a kid, what do you picture? I think we've all got that same image. Sitting there messing with the ribbon in the prayer book until your parents yell at you. Braiding your dad's tallis, right? Wasn't just me. And I'm sure that that's going to be my kids by next year. But it's really, how do I put this? Sorry, candy brain again from not sleeping enough. This idea of being able to take religion and make it your own. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of this fiction where their job is Jew. Because they're so desperate to explain it to everybody that they're not actually allowing for the individuality that makes this ours. Because I would argue that no two people in this room celebrate the religion in the exact same way. And I think that there's a lot of religions that you can't do that as much. And I don't want to call it picking and choosing, but we're able to take what's most meaningful to us. And that concept, while I'm not sitting here thinking, what Jewish aspects of life am I going to put into my books, especially with what's going on right now, as I'm looking at these future books, I really do want to think about these stories of joy, of happiness, of just living life without somebody coming to kill us. Because while that is a fact of life, that's an every generation thing, right? I had to explain that to some of my students this week, that this is not the first time, not the last time, not the 75th time. It's going to keep coming. But we need some comic relief. We need some cheering up. And Jewish comedy in particular is definitely there. We love to laugh, don't we? You guys are a tough crowd today. I'm not getting as many laughs as usual. All right, I got to be funnier. Although I was the #1 humor writer on Amazon all summer, and so anytime one of my students says I'm not funny, I'm like, America begs to differ. Is it bad? A kid did say that. They were like, maybe your jokes aren't that good. And I literally pulled up the little, look, #1. I'm terrible. Anyways, that idea of incorporating humor into it, because humor is such a part of our story. You get to a point where it's either laugh or cry, right? I don't know about you. I've done enough crying this week. So incorporating those funny stories. My grandmother was such a card. She still is. She's where I got my storytelling voice in a lot of ways. She cannot write to save her life. She sends me these emails that it's not even remotely comprehensible. And she gets to the end and she writes, love me. And I'm like, okay. She used to write me letters when I was in college. And you'd read these and be like, what? Is that English? What is that? But her stories were fantastic. Excuse me, sorry. And I did use a little bit of family history in writing She's Up to No Good. Switching the town to the fake town allowed me to open it up a little bit more than it would have if I had used the real town. If I had used the real town, I felt like I was really going to be tied to what actually happened. And I didn't want to use the exact story of my great aunt dying of cancer and never knowing about what happened with her ex-boyfriend. It was too personal. I think it was going to anger my cousins. I never met her. And it's fiction. So I wanted to take that and I wanted to twist it in a way that worked for this story. But I wanted to make sure that those humor elements were incorporated. And my grandmother, her stories are outrageous. So one of my favorite ones, this did not make it into the book, but it is an example of this kind of Jewish joy. So my grandmother was the youngest of 6. And her oldest sibling was her brother, who was 13 years older than her. She claims she remembers his bar mitzvah because she was peeking out of her mother's belly button. She swears to this day. She can describe what was on the tables. Like, Grandma, you weren't there. Calm down. All right, so he used to sneak out. My Uncle Leo, he was actually the mayor of Gloucester in the 70s. He was very much larger than life. He used to sneak out and he'd pay my grandmother a dime to unlock the door because my great-grandfather would lock him out if he snuck out. So she'd sneak downstairs and she'd unlock the door. And she did this one night, and my great-grandmother used to make her own wine. And apparently she would stuff a rag in the top of the bottle while it was fermenting. And one night, my great-uncle Leo walks into the house, and one of the bottles of wine explodes. And he starts yelling, "Pa, they got me! They shot me, Pa, I'm dying!" Everybody comes running down the house. He's just covered in wine. Totally fine. I don't know what he thought happened. Nothing hurt. What? She's covered in red liquid. But stories like that are what I grew up on. And this idea of a family laughing together. My grandfather, who was the grumpiest old man you can picture, used to love to sit there at the Rosh Hashanah table and just tell jokes until everybody was just like on the floor laughing. And, you know, I had a very special relationship with him. I was the only girl. There were 7 boys and me, and I was the oldest, so I was Snow White. My cousins did not appreciate their dwarf names, because I was mean. It's fine. I was the one in charge. My grandfather and I had a very special relationship, and I was the one person he wasn't grumpy with. But those jokes, nobody could tell a joke like my grandfather. And I loved that idea of being able to bring that in, because think about it. We've all sat in a sermon where the rabbi either had it and could make you laugh, or he did not. And you did not want to sit in those sermons, and that's when you'd sneak out and talk to your friends. I think we've all left a sermon to go to the bathroom before, right? Not just me. Actually, I kind of use that in the new book where my characters sneak out during the sermon and go make out and go crashing through a stained glass window and get busted in 1960, and yeah, they get in some trouble. But it's one of those things where you know it when you see it, and it's really a part of our culture. We look at all of these Jewish actors, we look at Jerry Seinfeld even, we look at, I'm trying to think of some of the other comedians right now, and there's just something cultural to it that I can't quite put my finger on, but we all know it when we see it. Like, you can spot a Jewish comedian, right? And using those stories, using that humor, means it's not a sad story anymore. The story I told you guys at the beginning was a sad story, right? The ex-boyfriend marrying somebody else a week later? That is not a happy ending by any stretch of the imagination. But there are still elements of joy in a life, no matter what happens in it, even if it doesn't have the happy ending that you might want. Now, she never quite got over that situation. And that may have led to her husband cheating eventually. I'm not going to blame her on that. But if she wasn't all in, it's hard for somebody else to be all in. And I think that that balance really does need to be there. Sorry. I've got terrible fall allergies. It's really fun, which I did not know that I had until COVID. My husband used to be like, "You're sick from like October to April." And I was like, "Yeah, I get sick from school." No, it was allergies. Okay. Anyway, using that balance is so important. It's not just being Jew as a job. It's not just sitting there and talking about the times that they tried to kill us. It's talking about life and the ups and the downs to it. Now, like I said, I write comedies. I try to make you guys laugh and all this. But the reality is, life is pretty funny when you can sit down and actually take a look at it. Not everything. We're going through a lot that isn't right now. But there is a lot that still is. And that's kind of my challenge to you, is to look for that, especially right now. Because we could all use a laugh right now. And it's just interesting to see where that takes us. So, like I said, my new book, I don't think they have that one out there yet, but that one is a laugh riot from page 1, where they go crashing through the stained glass. And I actually took some inspiration from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on that. I wanted that vibe. Any fans of that show? Except season 5 went off the rails. What was that? I haven't even finished season 5 because I'm just like, go back to the good stuff. Come on. I also want more Midge and Lenny Bruce. I would watch a whole spin-off of the two of them. But I liked the idea of playing off of that humor aspect. So my characters are not stand-up comics, but they've got that same kind of vibe to it. Because there is a lot of funny that we can find in the everyday, that we can find in families. I mean, we've all got some family story that you crack up whenever you think about. Don't we all have one of those? Oh, yeah. And they're great. And it's something that we pass on. I never met my Uncle Leo, but I told my kids the story about the wine bottle. And that's one of those other basic tenets of Judaism. Like I said, my mom may get into whatever heaven is up there, but we don't specifically believe in that. We believe that we live on through the memories that we leave. And I don't know about you, but I don't want the memories that I leave to be the sad ones. I want, when I'm gone, my family to sit there and laugh about the ridiculous stuff that I did. And I've done some ridiculous stuff. I was talking about this last night with my best friend, the same one with the wedding where she was the Darth Vader theme music. Her bachelorette party was at, anybody seen, remember that 80s movie, St. Elmo's Fire? The bar from St. Elmo's Fire was in Georgetown. It was not called whatever it was called in the movie. It was called Third Edition by the time we were going there, and they had a tree in the backyard. At the bachelorette party, I said something about it being a good climbing tree. Whoever I was talking to was like, you couldn't climb a tree. He was wrong. I couldn't get down from the tree, and it took 3 bouncers to get me out of the tree, at which point they were like, yeah, you're going now. And I was like, yes, I am. Thank you. So I go back there the following year, and I'm telling this story to whoever I'm talking to, and the person goes, you can't climb that tree. That didn't happen. What do you think I did? I climbed the tree, and I got stuck again. And the bouncers come over and just literally look up at the tree and go, you again? And I wish I could tell you that's the last time I did it, but I did it a 3rd time and still got stuck in that tree. They eventually closed, and my best friend jokes that they closed just so they could keep me out of the tree. I don't think I've ever climbed a tree before that in my life, but if you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to do it. So, like I said, I've done some ridiculous stuff, but that's the kind of story I want my kids telling about me. I don't want them telling the sad ones. And I think we're all going to take some secrets with us when we go. But I also like this idea of being able to surprise people. And my grandmother is still surprising me with some of these stories. And in fact, when I gave her her copy of She's Up to No Good, if you check it out, it is actually dedicated to her, which was very cool to be able to give her at 95 when the book came out. And she read it. She normally does books on tape, as she calls them, not audiobooks. And she wanted to actually read this one. It took her a while. I said, it's not great. We offered to give it to her on a Kindle so she could read it bigger, but no, she had to experience it in book form. So, okay, she read it. And she told me it was her life. And I was like, no, Grandma, it's not. Like, I made all that stuff up. And she just looks at me and she goes, you don't know all the things I did. I'm like, I don't think I want to then. Hang on. Because my character is kind of scandalous here. And I'm like, wait a minute, Grandma, wait a minute. But it was fun being able to share that with her. And she's not the character in the book, but she did inspire a lot of the character in the book. So if you read this thing, I will tell you the scene with the sweet and low, where she steals all of it from a rest stop, happened. I drove my grandmother to Philadelphia for Thanksgiving. I think my husband and I did. It would have been 7 years ago because I was pregnant with my first son. And driving for Thanksgiving when you're pregnant and everything takes 3 times longer was not an enjoyable experience, especially with my grandmother in the front seat counting the exits. But okay, we get to a rest stop and I take her in and then I lose her. And I'm like, where could she have gone? She's like, 90. Like, where? Okay, I find her over at the condiment station by Starbucks where she's just sweeping all the sweet and low into her purse. And I'm like, Grandma, you don't need it. She's like, well, I don't know what your uncle has. I was like, Grandma, I will buy you sweet and low. Stop stealing all the sweet and low. And she stole all the sweet and low. Now, the funny part is I get to my uncle's beach house that summer. He's got a beach house in Avalon, New Jersey, which is actually where my 3rd book is set. And I go looking for a coffee creamer because I usually leave some there from the previous year, and I drink the horrible Coffee Mate stuff that'll survive an apocalypse. And I'm looking in the cabinet, and every thing of sweetener, there's a big Ziploc bag of sweeteners, and they're all stolen from Wawa. I'm like, oh, God. You can tell my grandmother's been here. That or my uncle also inherited the stealing sweeteners gene. But she is still doing all of this stuff. She is still being crazy and kooky for fun. Sometimes I think she's just messing with me. There's no way she thought those elephant cocktail picks were actually an appropriate toy for a kid. She also tried to give them letter openers that had like a slot that was the exact size of a child's finger and has a razor at the end. I'm like, no. And then she wants me to leave them with her. And I'm like, you could not pick them up. You could not change a diaper. You cannot drive them anywhere. And she's like, I'll be fine. Just leave your car too. I'm like, so I'm going to walk someplace. Great. She also tries to tell me the kids don't need car seats. She's like, we didn't have any of that. My kids live. Yeah. It's okay. When she was driving without her license, she was like, what are they going to do? Arrest me? I was like, yes, they are. And I'm not bringing the kids to visit you in jail. And she was like, yes, you would. You'd slip me a file and a cake. I'm like, okay. So that is the kind of storytelling that I grew up with, and that is what I'm trying to bring some joy into this world because there is not enough of it right now. Sorry. Yeah, and that's about it. Are there any questions I can answer about literally anything? Okay. Can you use my teacher voice?
Oh, you know what? I got it. Okay. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. We all enjoyed smiling and laughing, and I think we can all relate to the sweet and low. So, Anybody have any, does anybody have a question? Questions?
On that note, my mother once stuffed a whole chicken in her purse from a Passover Seder when we were out of town. That was
Okay.
a whole chicken. She wrapped it in napkins and shoved that chicken in her purse. We had leftovers for days.
So the book talks a lot about the grandmother and the grandchild, and not a lot about the parents. Any, thought on that, or why you chose to skip that generation?
So, interestingly, that's what I'm focusing on in my fourth book, which comes out this summer, is that mother-daughter bond there. But I think there is something special about a grandparent bond. And one of the most fun things about having my own kids now is watching that grow with my parents, with my kids. We live 1.5 miles from my parents, which, as I say, most of the time is great. I can almost throw the kids to their house. They actually just built a bike path, like from my house to theirs. It's awesome. They put in a light at the big main road and everything. So as soon as the kids are bigger, I'm going to be like, get on your bike, go. But there's just something special about that grandparent relationship. So we had a day off from school today, which is how I was able to be here. We're going to Disney on Saturday, which, yeah. And I didn't want to take more time off of work. We have a new principal this year. She's a little on top of things with that. And this worked out perfectly, but my husband was on full duty today with the kids. And my 6-year-old, Jacob, looks at me a few days ago when I'm talking to him about this. I was like, okay, this is the first day. You're not going to see mommy all day because I had to leave before they were up. And he just looks at me and he's like, I can go to grandma's house, right? And it's so funny because there was a meme about this where, my mom is a mom. You'll eat what I give you and you'll like it. My mom is a grandma. Oh, sweetie, do you want your grilled cheese cut into hearts or stars? And it's so true. Like those white sofas that I'm still not allowed to sit on, my kids can eat on them. And I'm not talking like eating crackers that you can I got one kid sitting there eating an applesauce pouch. And I'm like, seriously? Seriously? I can't even, and I was like, can I sit on the sofa now? My mom was like, absolutely not. Anyway, that relationship there's just something so special about it. And I think that we probably know a little bit more about our parents' lives than our grandparents' lives. We grew up in the house with them. We saw them when they were younger than we did with our grandparents. And for this story in particular, I wanted something that was a little bit more removed. I think she would have, I know vaguely, at least, about the people my parents dated before each other. In fact, the day that my parents met at a riot protesting the Vietnam War, my dad had been on campus at the University of Maryland because he was dropping off another girl, which she was never seen or heard from again. That's fine. Worked out. But we know a little bit more, and I liked the idea of touching on something where we really didn't know much of anything. And so that grandparent relationship really worked out well for this story. The next book, don't forget to write it, is actually a 20-year-old girl and her 75-year-old great aunt. And the great aunt is not what you would expect. It is a lot of fun. But my next one that comes out this coming summer, I just finished my acknowledgments sitting out there actually. That one is actually more that mother-daughter relationship. And it is also a lot of fun because I think Jewish moms are their own breed. And I know because I am one now. And my poor 6-year-old, he's the only Jewish kid in his grade, and I don't know how that happened, and it's so sad. But our neighbor next door, who's not Jewish, saw that he was getting upset last year in kindergarten when people talked about Christmas. And so every time anybody mentioned Christmas, she would stand up and go, "And Hanukkah," and then sit back down. I love this girl. She's awesome. Although they're in love and planning to get married, and I'm like, okay, you're 6, and we need to cut that out right now. But not because she's not Jewish. I just don't want to have to watch them like hawks in high school. Very cute family. Hope that answered that question.
Any other questions?
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to reading the book, and you made a comment a little bit earlier about it would be nice if we could learn some things. We look at our grandparents, or in my case, an aunt of mine, and we think this is how they always were, and of course that's just not true. About 3 years ago, my 93-year-old aunt passed away, and I had the task of going through, all her condominium, whatever, and going through all her drawers and, getting rid of stuff. And I came across this envelope with all these pictures in it, and they were pictures that she had saved of all of her ex-boyfriends. I was like, oh my God. It was just, if you knew my aunt, it was just unbelievable. And I would thought, after she married my uncle, to whom she was happily married for years, I would have assumed she had just gotten rid of it. She did not get rid of any of them.
I'm going to piggyback off that with two things. So my great aunt died during the pandemic, and her son lives in Canada now. He's my dad's best friend, and he's also an accountant, which is awesome because I don't understand money. Like, I understand if I have it, I can spend it, and if I don't, I shouldn't. He is helping significantly in doing my taxes. But so it was his mother who died, and he came down and cleaned out her condo and asked my parents if he could store some stuff in their basement. And this was October 2019, I guess, when she passed, because, yeah, it was pre-pandemic, and I was pregnant but not telling people yet. And one of the things he brought over was a giant trash bag full of toilet paper. And my parents were like, "You're going to leave old dead woman toilet paper in our basement for how long now?" Now, okay, this happened in October 2019. Fast forward a few months, that toilet paper was actually a really great inheritance. When you couldn't find any, we had a huge trash bag. We were sitting pretty on the block. It was great. The other story with that, so my grandmother got on Facebook probably like 10 years ago. She calls the internet the Google. She'll be like, "Oh, I looked on the Google," and I'm like, "Do you mean Google? Do you mean Facebook? I don't know what you mean there." Okay. She called it Bookface for a while too, so, you know. But she made me set up her account, and I went to like pick a picture with her, and she was like, "I look so old in these." And she finally flips through, and she goes back to her engagement picture from when she was 20. And then she makes me, my grandpa was still alive back then, she makes me crop my grandpa out of it so her old boyfriends can find her. And I'm like, "Grandma, Grandpa's sitting right downstairs. Are you kidding me right now?" And she was like, "Well, they have to be able to find me. They won't recognize me now." And I'm like, "Why do you want them to find you so bad? What's going on here? How many old boyfriends were there? Wait a minute." But it's true. There is so much. So my uncle, for example, he died in 2008. He was a neurosurgeon. And if you actually know any brain surgeons, they actually took the course that he created. He was considered one of the top 3 in the world. He was a big deal. And it was really sad. He diagnosed himself with a glioblastoma, and he was the world expert in them. There was one person on the planet who could have operated on the exact kind that he had, and it was him. He got lost coming home from work one day and knew that wasn't right, and he went in for a scan, looked at it, and said, "I should be dead." And he was gone 6 weeks later. My uncle was an interesting case, though, because he never married and he never had kids. He was 15 years older than my dad, and like I said, my dad's dad died in 1960, and my dad was 9. And he was really the grandfather figure on that side of the family. And we adored him. I mean, he was known for giving the best gifts. He gave me my first car. And in the most spectacular, like, it was a Mitsubishi Galant. It was nothing flashy. He wanted safe for me. But he lived in Indianapolis, and he took us out to the Indy 500. He was one of the doctors for the racers. And we're like watching this, we're in the owner's box, and he was like, "You see those cars? You're not getting that kind, but we'll pick out a different one next week." And I was like, "What?" Like, what? He took us to Disney when we were kids. He called my mom. Was like, "You think the kids want to go to Disney?" And as she explained after she peeled us off the ceiling, yes, we wanted to go to Disney. He gave me a typewriter, actually, when I was 8, and said I was going to be a writer. I had written him letters, and I don't know what he could have seen in 8-year-old me, because I know from having a 6-year-old, those letters couldn't have been good. But he did. And because he lived alone, we always kind of wondered. You know, he died before his mother did, by a year. His mother was the one who, my grandfather was engaged to somebody else, that grandmother. And my mom and I used to have a lot of conversations about that, and we just wondered if maybe he was gay. Maybe there was somebody in his life that he was afraid to tell people. Now, we would have been cool. We didn't care. We wanted him to be happy. His sister is a little bit less accepting with some of that. She's now got 2 gay grandkids and is, on board, but at the time she was less accepting. And I think my grandmother would have been okay, but probably would have made some comments that would have been uncomfortable. And I've got a few cousins on the other side of the family who, as soon as their parents were gone, came out in quite style. One of them married a Russian ballerina, and that was the craziest wedding I've ever seen in my life. Like, it was intense. And we kind of wondered. And so when he died, we were really looking around the funeral, like, is there somebody here? And there wasn't. And so we'll never actually know the answer to that. But that's one of those things where he didn't leave documents for us to go through, which we're not sure if that is more evidence or less, to be honest. He left us a lot of artwork. He left us contents of his house. But the documents were left to his friend. And so we do kind of wonder if there was more going on than we ever got from the story. We had really only heard of him dating one woman, and that was back in the 50s. And we don't know. So that idea of just, we don't know necessarily. There's so much that we keep to ourselves. Like, I'd love to tell you, I tell my husband everything. I don't tell my husband everything, especially not how much some of my shoes cost, but that's another story. I make my own money writing, it's fine. He doesn't need to know. My grandmother was like that too, it's terrible. She used to be like, oh no, it only cost me $10, and she's spending like $400. But yeah, that's one of those cool things that sometimes you uncover that stuff. Any other questions?
This isn't a question, it's just a comment. If you haven't read this book, it's such a pleasure. That personality up there is what's in the book, and at this time, it's a pleasure to read those kinds of things. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that leads us to, we do have one more question. Okay.
I just wanted to know about, you have a very busy life. You're a teacher, you're a mother. I was a teacher. I just want to know, you have a husband, so when do you have the time? What's the writing process like?
The writing process is not much fun right now. Basically, the majority of my writing happens between 8 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. after my kids go to bed, assuming my kids go to bed, which is becoming less and less frequent. The 3-year-old needs to not be napping, and daycare has him napping. I was a journalism major in college before I went to English to become a teacher. And honestly, I think that is the entire reason that I can do this. My editor has told me I turn in the quickest, cleanest draft she's ever seen. She's up to no good. I wrote the entire thing in 14 weeks in that hour and a half at night. And that was after teaching virtually all day, because we were still virtual during the pandemic, while wearing my now 3-year-old, which was probably the best birth control for high school kids on the planet, because it was me and a baby head on Zoom. Although I did have some kids who would sign off if my mom came and took the baby, because they were just there to watch him, which was pretty funny. I teach high school, but it's all electives this year. So this year I've got mostly upperclassmen. So I've got creative writing, journalism, and newspaper, which is the best schedule on the planet. Please let me keep this for the remainder of my teaching career. It's great. But yeah, it's rough. So my third book, Don't Forget to Write, I'll tell this story quickly because I think we're trying to wrap up. For this one, it was the week that She's Up to No Good came out, and it had been in Amazon First Reads, and it had done really well on that. And my editor wrote to me, and she completely rejected the idea that I had for after this one, and then said, okay, come up with something else. What's next? And I'm like, And she wanted Evelyn vibes, but not a copycat character. That's what she said. What is that? Vibes? What does that mean? I don't know what that means. But I'm sitting here trying to figure this thing out. And I eventually got the idea. I was on the beach in Avalon. That's where most of the book is set. And I turned to my husband, and I was like, I think I just figured out the next book. He was like, right now? He was trying to put up the beach umbrella, and I was like, right now. Put him on duty on the kids. I sat under that umbrella, and I wrote out the entire proposal for it on my phone. I sent it to my agent and editor that afternoon on the beach. They loved it. They wanted to see an outline. I wrote the outline that night. I wrote the first 3 chapters the next night, and we left the beach that week with a contract, which is not a thing. I still don't know how they pushed that through that quickly. It was crazy. But my editor was like, well, we would need it by October, and this is August 3rd, she's telling me this. And, nobody can do it that fast. And I was like, oh, I can. Spoiler, I did not know that I could do that. But she was like, well, we want to keep you on the book a year track. And I didn't know what that meant, but it sounded good, and I wanted to be on that track. So I wrote Don't Forget to Write in 39 days. I would rather give birth unmedicated than do that again. It was horrible. I was working on it at school. I bought a ridiculously overpriced thing called a free write, which is basically a portable wireless typewriter with an e-ink screen like a Kindle, and you folds up, weighs nothing, and it's distraction free. And I was using that at a pep rally at school. My coworkers made a lot of fun of me about that. There were a lot of pictures in an English department group chat of me working during a pep rally. But right now, it's whenever I can find the time to do this. And it's my lifelong dream. I've wanted this since I was 8. So I'm going to figure out how to make it work, even if I am getting almost no sleep right now. And hopefully, eventually, I can cut back hours even more, or else quit teaching for now and focus on writing. That's the plan eventually.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Books are available for purchase on the book fair floor, and then Sarah will sign them for you. Purchase first, please. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you so much.